Hello everyone, Reza here. In this video, we will look at a very important topic, SharePoint security in PowerApps. I will showcase a very simple technique through which you can quickly apply item level permissions to your SharePoint data. I will also show you how we can apply custom item level security permissions by leveraging Power Automate. So let's check it out in action. Let's begin with creating a Power App based on a list in a modern SharePoint site. We will go to New and create a list and leverage one of the existing Microsoft list templates. I'll pick Work Progress Tracker and use this template. I'll use the default name and click Create. The goal of this video is to focus on the security aspect of a Power App that is connected to a SharePoint list. The easiest way to create a simple 3-screen Power App is by directly leveraging the Integrate option in the ribbon for the modern SharePoint list, going to Power Apps and selecting Create an App. I will give the app a name and click Create. And this now will create a 3-screen Power App based on our Work Progress Tracker SharePoint list. In the Canvas Studio experience, if I was to preview the app, this is a fully workable app. So if I click on the plus icon to create a new record, I can start entering the data. And once I have the form filled out, I can click on Submit. So this record or this item will get created in my SharePoint list, which is my Work Progress Tracker list. The home screen of this app has a gallery that will showcase all the list items. The user can select an existing list item, make modifications to it, or go ahead and delete that list item. Now I've gone ahead and created a couple of items in the list through my Power App. In this gallery control, the subtitle property, I would like to showcase the name of the user who has created this list item. So I will change the text property to this item dot created by dot display name. So we have the name of the creator in here. Now once we are ready to publish this app and share this app with other users, we can head over to File, Save, and publish the Power App. Next step is to share the app. So I'll click on Share. And right here, I can start entering the names of the email addresses of the users I would like to share my app with. I can also plug in group email addresses in here. I'll share this app with Sarah and James. Now the first key thing to note, when you're sharing an app with users and the app leverages SharePoint as a connector, we can see a message that's provided for us that you need to make sure that your users have access to the data that is being used in your app. So this app is connecting to my Work Progress Tracker list, and I'm sharing this app with Sarah and James. Even though I'm sharing this app with them, that does not mean they have access to the backend data. The permissions that Sarah and James require to work with that SharePoint list needs to be defined within SharePoint itself. Here, I'm just sharing the app. If I click on Share, Sarah and James will be notified that this app has been shared with them, and they can go in and start leveraging this Power App. Here is the email that Sarah has received. The Work Progress Tracker app has been shared with her. When Sarah clicks on Open the app, Sarah is accessing this app for the first time. So Sarah needs to go ahead and allow the connection to the SharePoint connector. Now right here, there is one very important concept to understand. Whenever you have a SharePoint connection inside Power Apps, any user who is running that Power App, the SharePoint connector will run under their account. That means there is no option for me to run my Power App connections related to SharePoint in an elevated privileges kind of a scenario. So for example, Sarah has no permissions on the SharePoint list, but I would like Sarah to go ahead and see all the items in my Power App. That is not an option in PowerApps. So Sarah would need to have those permissions in SharePoint in order for Sarah to interact with that data. Here, Sarah is being prompted to connect to the SharePoint connector. So Sarah says allow. And once Sarah does that, if you observe, it says you don't have permission to view this data. Now this means that Sarah has no permissions on that SharePoint list. However, Sarah has access to the app, and that's why she can play the app. But she also needs the desired permissions in order for her to start working with the data. That means Reza, as the creator of the app, needs to also ensure that Sarah and James and any other user I'm sharing the app with also have the required permissions. So back to my SharePoint site, if I head over to settings and go to site permissions, we have site owners who have full access or full control. Site members, this is where I would like to grant Sarah and James access as members so that they can start interacting with the data. So I'll click on Share Site, pick Sarah, pick James. Now by default, they're getting read access. That means they can read the data, but I want them to create items or edit items. So I'll pick the edit permission for Sarah. I'll pick the edit permission for James and click add. So now Sarah and James are added as site members. Both of them have edit permissions. Now if Sarah tries to launch the app again, this time Sarah can see all the data in the gallery inside the Power App because now Sarah has the access to the backend data. And Sarah has edit permissions. So Sarah can create new items, Sarah can delete items, and Sarah can also go ahead and edit the data. Now we come across various scenarios in which we would like to secure our data. Let's take one use case. I would like the logged in user to only have access to the content that they have created in my SharePoint list. And the standard approach that we take to secure or hide data in PowerApps so that users can only see information that they have created is we go ahead and filter that data. So for example, filter my work progress tracker list where the created by user is the current logged in user. Now if I do that, it will work. However, it will only work inside the context of PowerApps. Nothing stops the user from heading to the backend SharePoint list and going straight to that list item. And the reason is because the user has been granted that access in SharePoint. So if Sarah goes to the SharePoint list, Sarah can see all the items. Now there are ways in which you can hide the SharePoint list. You can create a view wherein the user only sees their own data. And there are techniques in which you can hide information. But that is more on the lines of audience targeting, wherein you're only showing things based upon the logged in user. It is not true security. A smart user can always run the developer toolbar, run a network trace, look at the API calls that are going on in the backend, grab the URL to that SharePoint list, formulate the URL to a specific list item, get to it through PowerShell. There are various other means through which they can get to it. So in reality, your data is not truly secured. So in order for us to truly secure our list items, we need to work with something known as item level permissions, wherein we set the permission in SharePoint for our specific items. Now this technique will work for both SharePoint lists and SharePoint libraries. There is a feature under settings. So go to settings and list settings, head over to advanced settings. Right here we have item level permissions. Here you can specify which items users can read and edit. Read access currently is set to read all items. That means users can read all the items in the SharePoint list. If I change this to read items that were created by the user and click OK, I have now changed the setting of my SharePoint list. This time, if Sarah logs into that Power App, Sarah does not see any data. If Sarah was to create a new item, the gallery on the home screen now showcases only the item that Sarah has created. If James logs into that same Power App, James does not see any data in the gallery. That's because James has not yet created any item. So just by enabling this one setting, we can set item level permissions wherein users can only read their own data. Now there can also be scenarios wherein you would like users to read all items. However, they should be able to edit only those items that were created by them. So for that, I'll pick the create items and edit items that were created by the user feature. Let's click OK. Now when Sarah launches the app, Sarah will see all the records. The ones that were created by Reza, we can see the created by in play as well right here. If James was to launch the same app, James can see all the information as well. However, James cannot edit or delete items that were created by other users. So let's try this. Learn app design. This was created by Reza. James can read the data, but if James tries to delete, it won't delete that record. If James tries to edit it and make some changes and tries to save it, it will not go ahead and make those updates. The reason is because item level permission has been put in place, which will not allow James to edit or delete content that he has not created. Here is Sarah's scenario. Sarah cannot modify the content that was created by Reza, but Sarah can modify the content that she created. Here's the item that Sarah created. If I select this, can edit this, can change the status, let's say to completed, and submit. The change will be reflected and we can see the data being updated. So this setting of item level permissions is extremely handy, and PowerApps will respect the permission settings, and this is true security. Now the item level permissions does not come into play for users who have elevated access. For example, users who have full control. Reza has full control on that SharePoint site. So Reza will have full access to all the items, and the item level permission will not apply for the owners, in this case Reza. Here's the record that Sarah changed the status to completed. I'll modify this, put it back in progress, make the change, and you can see that that change is being reflected. So you can have super users or admin scenarios, and those users could be your owners, and then users who are members of your site like Sarah, James, they will have to adhere to the item level permissions. Now we also come across more advanced scenarios. For example, when a user creates an item, that user should have access to the item and some other specific users based on the type of data, based on the department the user belongs to, or maybe the user's manager from AD needs to have access to that item. There could be various other security-based scenarios. Now for those kind of use cases, item level permissions is something that we would have to work with, but the advanced settings feature is quite basic in that respect. You only have these features to play with. So for those scenarios, first thing, I will set the item level permissions to the basic setting, which is read all items and create and edit all items. Now for scenarios wherein you would want to grant specific permissions to an item, we will need to break permissions on that item. And to do that, we will have to leverage Power Automate. In Power Automate, I will head over to Create and create an automated cloud flow. Trigger this flow when an item is created in my SharePoint list. I will give my flow a name and click Create. I will connect to my SharePoint site. I will pick my SharePoint list. Bear in mind, I am creating this flow from my account. My account is an owner of that SharePoint site, basically has full control permissions. So I have the ability to break permissions on an item. First step that I need to take when a new item is created in that work progress tracker list is I want to go ahead and break the existing permissions of the item. And to do that, there is an action called stop sharing an item or a file. Here, once again, I'll provide my site address. I will pick my SharePoint list, and it requires the ID of the item, which I will get under dynamic content from my trigger action, which is when an item is created. I will select this. What this action does is it will delete all the links giving access to an item or a file and remove all people with direct access except for owners. That means owners of the site will have access to that item, but all other users, including the person who created the item, would lose access to that specific item. So that's the first step we need to take. Next, we need to grant permissions. I will add a step, and we also have an action called grant access to an item or a folder for SharePoint. I'll select this. Once again, put my SharePoint site URL, pick my work progress tracker list, put in the ID, recipients. This is where I can define which users now need to have access to that item. And one of the users is the person who has created that item. Here, I can either enter the users directly by typing in their name and picking the user through the suggestions. Or in my case, since I want the created by user, I will switch to advanced mode. And right here, I will pick the created by user's email address. I can add as many recipients as I want right here. If you put in group email addresses right here, Microsoft 365 groups, mail-enabled security groups, even that works right here. In this case, I'm going to keep it very simple. The created by user will have access to the item, and the role that I would like to grant to that user is, do you want to give them edit access or view access? So here, you can add an extra layer of security when you're sharing that item. In my case, the user has created the item. I would like to grant that user the access to even edit the item, so I'll pick Can Edit. In my work progress tracker list, I also have a person type column assigned to, wherein the user can create an item and assign it to someone. So if I want to give that user as well access to that item, I can do that. I can go right here and under dynamic content, pick the assign to email. If I need to give access to the user's manager from AD, I can simply use the Office 365 users connector, and there is an action here called get manager. I can give the email address of my created by user, get their manager information, and just plug it in right here under recipients. For approval scenarios, I have done many videos on approvals wherein we select the approvers dynamically based on the type of data or the category of data that the user selects. All those scenarios can play in right here as well. Once we have our approvers, we can grant those approvers access to this item by using this action. And you can break this action up. I can add another action also, wherein I'm just granting those specific users, maybe my approvers, view access, which is basically read access on the data. In this scenario, I will grant access to the creator and the person to whom the task is assigned to. Both of those users will have edit access on that item. Now, one thing that is important to ensure is when you're adding the recipients, they have to be separated by a semicolon. It's important that you have this in here. This completes my flow. I'll go ahead and click save. Now this flow is saved. The flow is listening to an item being created in the SharePoint list. The moment the item is created, the flow will trigger and start setting the appropriate permissions. Let's check this out in action. Reza goes ahead and creates a new item and assigns this task to Sarah and clicks on submit. So the moment that item got created, the flow has triggered and gone ahead and set the necessary security. If we go back to the SharePoint list, select the specific item and go to details. Here, click on manage access and go to advanced. This will show us the security setup for that specific item. The creator was Reza. Reza was a part of the owners group, so Reza has full control access, but Reza assigned the task to Sarah. So Sarah now gets the contribute access. Basically, Sarah can edit that data. Now signing into the app with Sarah, project report was the item where the security has been set up. So if Sarah was to select this and modify this, Sarah can make changes because she has the access to do that. If James was to sign into the app, James will not even see that record because James does not have permissions to read that list item. So that is true security in play right here. Next, there are scenarios in which after a process is complete, typically an approval process or maybe some status that changes. In this scenario, I have a column called progress, which has an option completed. So when something is marked as completed, at that instant, I would like that item to be visible to all my users. Maybe it's an ongoing item until it is not complete. Other users should not be able to see that item. Once again, security. Now, one way to do it is by setting permissions when the status changes to completed. Another technique is to leverage folders. Now, to enable folders, we can head over to list settings, go to advanced settings. Here, I will enable the folder creation option. Go back to my SharePoint list and create a new folder. I will call this my completed folder. Basically, when my item status changes to completed, I will move it into this folder. Now, what's the advantage of moving it into a folder? Why not just setting the permissions again? Well, if I start setting permissions for every item and my list keeps growing, there are certain considerations with item level permissions for large lists in SharePoint. The recommendation is to not have item level permissions for lists more than 10,000 records. However, if I create a folder and move items inside a folder and set the permission on the folder, all the items inside that folder can respect the permissions that I've set on the folder. For this folder, if I head over to details, go to manage access, go to advanced, this folder is respecting the permissions of the list, but I will break the permissions. And this I can do manually. Here, my members have edit access to the data in the folder. So I'm going to change this. I'll edit user permissions and change this to read. So the permissions are now modified for the folder, wherein members can only read the data and owners have full access. That means my members like Sarah or James, once the process is complete, that data becomes read-only since I will move that data into the specific folder. Now comes the question of how do I move the data? Once again, we want to do that automatically, and automation means Power Automate. So once again, I will create an automated cloud flow. I will pick the trigger as when an item or a file is modified. I've given this flow a name. I'll click create. Once again, I'll connect to my SharePoint site. I'll connect to my SharePoint list. Now I want to move the item only if the status is completed. Typically, we add a condition here to check the status. In my case, the column is called progress. It's a choice column. So I'll pick progress value. Is this equal to completed? If it is, then I'll take the following actions. However, since my trigger is when an item is modified, any modification that takes place on the item, this flow will keep getting triggered. And you will waste flow runs, you will waste API calls, which are limited. Instead of doing that, we can leverage a concept called trigger conditions. I have done videos on this as well. All these links will be in the description for this video, so do check it out. But here, I will go to settings, and under trigger conditions, I will add an expression here that checks to see if that progress column value is completed. So this will trigger my flow only when that scenario takes place. So I do not need the condition. Now, once this flow triggers, I would like to move the item. And for that, if I search for move, we have an action for move file, which allows us to move a file. However, there is no action to move an item. Michel Mendes has written an awesome blog post that shows us how to move list items to folders. I will highly recommend you to follow him. Here, he shows us how we can leverage the HTTP action in Power Automate to call an endpoint to move the item to a specific folder. The beauty of the move action is it moves the item along with the security and also keeps the versions intact. So following his blog, we have an action called send an HTTP request to SharePoint. I will select this action. Once again, I'll enter my SharePoint site address. The method will be post. The API endpoint will be _API/web/get file by server relative URL. Here, I need to give the relative URL to my item. And to give that, in my case, my SharePoint site, the relative URL begins from /sites/learn-tech. So I'm going to copy that. I'll paste it right here. I need the path to that item. Under dynamic content, I have a property called full path. That's coming from my trigger action. I'll pick that. Put a single quotes, close this action, put a slash, and now there is an endpoint called move to. And here I need to pass the new URL that I would like to move this to. Once again, I'm moving it to the same SharePoint site. So relative URL, I'll plug in /sites/learn-tech/. Here, I need to now put the full path of where this specific item is heading to. Now, the dynamic content full path already has most of the information that I need. The only thing that I need to append to it is the folder path, which has the name completed. If I select this, if you observe the path on the top, it adds that folder name to the path. So here, in order to append that folder name, I will use an expression, replace. I will go to dynamic content, pick the full path. So replace the full path. Here, I would like to replace the name of my SharePoint list, which will be in the URL. So replace under single quotes, that's the name of my SharePoint list, / replace this string with the name of my SharePoint list / the name of that folder which is completed /. Now if I select OK, it will plug in that expression. After this, I'll put a single quote, comma, flags is equal to 1 and close this function. This action will move that list item, including its permissions and versions, and move it into that folder called completed. Now, when it moves into that folder called completed, it has its own security already in place thanks to our first flow. But now we want the item to follow the security of the folder. And to do that, we have to reset the security of that item. And to do that as well, we have an API endpoint. So once again, I'll use the send an HTTP action to SharePoint, connect to my SharePoint site, use the post action. The endpoint here is API web lists get by title, the name of my list, /items. Here I need to give the ID of the item. So I'll get that directly from the trigger, single quotes, and then use the endpoint reset role inheritance. That means it will take the security then of the folder that it is in. That completes my flow. I'll go ahead and click save. The flow is saved. The flow is listening to an item in my work progress tracker list that gets modified and when the status of that item changes to completed. Here's Sarah, who has access to the project report item because Sarah has been assigned this item by Reza. So if Sarah was to edit this item and change the status to completed and click save, other users like James cannot see that item because James did not create the item, neither was James assigned that item. However, once the flow triggers, the flow will go ahead and move that item to that specific folder and set that item security to respect the folder security. If we look at the SharePoint list, that item is now moved to the completed folder. It will include the entire version history. And if we look at the permissions for this specific item, it's inheriting its permissions from the folder wherein we gave all the members read access. So James, who did not have access to that item, if James refreshes the gallery, James will see that specific item, which is the project report item. The status is now completed. If James selects completed, remember James only has read access, so he cannot edit, he cannot delete. Even if he tries it, it's not going to go through. And Sarah, who had edit access to that item, continues to see that item, but this time, if Sarah tries to make a change, that change will not be respected because Sarah does not have edit access anymore. It's gone down to read permissions. So that's how you can work with security in SharePoint and PowerApps. And you can see how we have various options to play with. All of those API endpoints that I called to set permissions, I will place them in the description of this video, so do check it out. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching.